what the world needs to overcome its over the limit fragmentation of information problem is it needs a new layer of integration that sort of brings on a simplexified coherence and allows for new forms of civilizational steering. That's what's trying to come into being this century.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Meta Modern Meaning podcast. Today, I'm super excited. I'm joined by Rob Smith. Rob is founder of the Institute of Applied Metatheory. Folks in the network may know him perhaps from a recent conversation as he's been talking to everyone in this network following his important white paper on the sociology of big pictures, which is something we'll touch on. You may also know him as the CEO and founder of Integral Life. Rob and I have been doing a lot of work within the Institute of Applied Metatheory recently, and I wanted to bring to people's attention all the really exciting things coming out of I Am. And so this is a conversation we're going to have for some time. A lot of really cool things on the horizon and just some really important things to announce and get into. But before we do that, thanks, Rob. I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here, and thanks for the invite.
Cool. All right, so this is so exciting. The Institute of Applied Metatheory. Someone may hear that and say, Metatheory, applied metatheory, what's going on here? This is, I think, I'll be very upfront. I think that the Institute of Applied Metatheory, henceforth I Am, is really doing some of the most important stuff in this broader network that we're a part of. And some of that we'll be, getting into in some detail in this conversation. But some people might not also know exactly what Metatheory is or what the Institute's about or what sort of the mission and vision and founding sort of context is. So let's just start there. What is I Am and what's it up to?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the invite, and happy to be here to talk about all of this. For those who don't know what metatheory is or integrative metatheory, human knowledge systems, at least in the last, hundreds of years, work on the basis of our empirical paradigms where we create theories about reality, and then we judge data from reality on those theories and whether those theories are more or less right. Meta theory arises to make sense of those theories. It uses the theories as data, whereas theories use reality as data. Meta theories use the theory as data. So to organize these bigger pictures that kind of make sense of like how are we understanding a given area, economics or anthropology or whatever. What integrative meta theory does is it takes it one step further and it says, okay, what are the patterns that connect across all of our knowledge traditions? And so integrative metatheory you can think of as some of the largest, most abstracted systems of how humans know everything in the human knowledge canon. And over the last 100 years, but arguably more in the last 50, we've had a whole wide array of very serious thinkers that have done a whole series of integrative meta theories from different traditions, different vantage points, different strengths and weaknesses that give us a really comprehensive and synoptic view of human knowledge in a way. And this sort of jumps ahead a little bit, but if indeed the global problematic today is that we're drowning in too much information without enough coherence, too much information, too many perspectives, but we don't have enough coherence about how to make sense of it, then these kinds of big pictures are precisely what is necessary to help to try to restore coherence at a higher level of what we say simplexity. So it's actually more complex, but in the complex organizational form that comes into being with bigger pictures, it actually simplifies what happens below it or inside of it. And so the Institute of Applied Metatheory is committed to taking these big pictures and doing many, many different things with them. But basically, it's dedicated to the research, the further exploration of them, the development of what we might call an integrative metatheory 2.0, so an entire next generation of simplexified big picture system or systems, and then applying it in the real world. That's the applied part. Like we're not just doing it for the sake of knowledge production, which is great and is liberating in its own way, we're also doing it to build institutions. We're doing it to develop new praxis or new capabilities of human action, to build new tools, which in a way is kind of embodied social practice, to build new methods and how we do things, and to create a new normative container, a new community sort of container for doing all of this, because it's our belief that ultimately that's what's going to be required to respond to a lot of the global conditions as we find them. So the Institute of Applied Metatheory is dedicated to really laboring on behalf of all of those things in kind of a fractal way, across a lot of different dimensions. There's everything everywhere all at once, which is not easy, and we probably don't do that great of a job in many ways, but we're doing our best.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's great. And yeah, to give some maybe more concrete specifics here for something that might sound very abstract. I mean, obviously, a lot of people watching this are going to be familiar with the integral meta theory, and what's come out of that, and sort of the whole work in integrative meta theories and the advances that have been attempted from within the integral community itself. Communication across meta theory communities like the integral and critical realism communities coming together, trying to do conversations. Nick Headland in his visionary realism, really important in that work, and Sean S. Bjorn Hargens, people who are trying to take the biggest pictures and the biggest maps and models that we've got and try to sync them up, compare, contrast, kind of do more philosophy building at that level. The unified theory of knowledge, people will certainly know, as that's really important for my work. And of course, Greg Enriquez has been on this podcast a number of times. And these are people in the Institute, Greg Enriquez, Nick Headland, lots of folks from an integral background. And again, we'll say more about some of that later. But it's been, really amazing to be communicating, working with, building with other people who are really at the forefront of these meta-theoretical models and these understandings, and then trying to apply them in the real world to actually bring coherence to a lot of the fragmented kind of incoherence that we see, fissuring our institutions and in many ways sort of infusing our collective system with a lot of chaos. So there's a very timely urgency around big picture thinking to bring some coherence and clarity to an otherwise very incoherent moment. So I know that the work that the Institute does, and the sociology of big pictures paper in particular that you wrote, frames the work very much in this way. Can you say a little bit more about that in terms of how this meta theory work relates to the meta crisis and kind of the collective moment that we're facing as a kind of incoherent breakdown?
The meta crisis is fundamentally a global steering problem, and it's a global steering problem that comes from the kind of over the limit complexity of the informational landscape and all of the fragmentation it's generating across our geopolitical and power structures, things that are going on economically as we head towards the singularity, and exponential technologies that we don't quite know how to think about from the point of view of governance. We don't regulate well in terms of these technologies, generally speaking. We can see through all of history that these kinds of things tend to, make their way into military uses pretty fast, for example, and that can really tip things from a meta crisis point of view. This is probably not our first meta crisis. I think it's probably our fourth or fifth. If we look at the end of the Bronze Age, end of 12th century, that's probably a meta crisis where we saw a radical breakdown within a generation, actually, and that entire region destroyed. And it gave rise to actually a whole new set of structures, epistemically, religiously, economically, all kinds of things. But, there was a meta crisis that kind of burned down the old order in a way, literally, because every settlement was literally burned down. But then you see the rise of the new. Obviously, we saw the same thing with the fall of Rome. As another meta crisis. Arguably, we see a meta crisis in the 16th and 17th centuries with the Reformation and Counter-Reformation and the wars that were created all across Europe that gave rise to the modern nation state after they were done, basically slaughtering each other, 10 million people dead, uh, based on religion. So, I mean, each time we end up in one of these civilizational steering problems, we find a set of characteristics that basically we're fragile. Our sense making is not up to task for what's actually happening. So we have a complexity gap that we can't quite manage. Um, we are not organized to develop higher forms of resilience and respond to it. And we hit this phase transition, and the phase transition often generates either a new form of organization to emerge, or it degenerates into further disintegration. So, to the extent that what we're experiencing today, again, is exponential technologies that are accelerating this fragmentation and wealth inequality and all these other things, we have a geopolitical breakdown that I've written about called the Great Release. That's my terminology, but basically the end of US hegemony of the last century. And what does that entail for the power structure around the world? The eco-social crisis, so the social side being the meaning crisis, that we have, we don't have very good narratives of meaning. Like we don't know who we are, and we don't know why we're here. And we have no good answer to that question from the postmodern worldview. So it ends up in kind of a nihilism and narcissism that then shows up in our depression data and our epidemiological data and our mental health data and a lot of sort of bad behavior stochastically across the Western countries. Um, and then, of course, we have climate. We have climate and the Anthropocene and all of the things that are happening in terms of the ecological crisis. So all of these make up the meta crisis. But fundamentally, at when you sum it all up, it's a civilizational steering problem. And so when we think about that, then we have to say, well, okay, if that's the civilizational steering problem, then how do we address that? Like, how do we actually attack that? How do we prepare for that? And are there ways to do it? We believe that there are ways to do it. There are ways that are sort of rationally approachable to make that problematic tractable and to organize to do it. And personally, I think that makes things very hopeful because then you can get after it and it gives your life a lot of meaning. And it's like, okay, here's the true north, and we got a lot of work to do. So, let's get after it. But basically, what we're trying to do is develop a new layer of integration. What the world needs to overcome its over the limit fragmentation of information problem is it needs a new layer of integration that sort of brings on a simplexified coherence and allows for new forms of civilizational steering. That's what's trying to come into being this century. And just as in the prior meta-crises, and each one was then answered by a new configuration in several ways of how humans lived and how they made sense of the world. I suspect we're going to have to do the same thing this one. And we're trying to do that in a reflexive way. We're trying to do it with knowledge of history. We're trying to do it with knowledge of what these meaning structures are actually doing, how we make sense of the world from a developmental point of view. And then invite the cooperation to do this in as transparent, as self-critical, anti-oppressive, anti-ideological, clean way as possible, because that ultimately is the way we make this better and not just sort of recreate a new set of problems that are even worse.
Totally.
So that's the goal.
Yes, awesome, amazing. That's such a good summary of that. And it also leads directly, I think, to a really important part of that story, which is that each time one of these kind of civilizational scale steering problems has arisen, there tends to be a massive phase transition, collective reorganization at sort of the social, societal, structural level, but also the emergence of new worldview meaning structures and meaning making systems. So you mentioned the Bronze Age collapse. Well, I mean, in some ways, the Axial Age is on the other end of that Bronze Age
Exactly
collapse.
right.
And you
Yep.
mentioned 16th, 17th century. In many ways, the modern worldview is what emerges after the Peace of Westphalia and the end of that war. And so each time there seems to be this kind of profound chaotic infusion, and often breakdown. There is some degree of something moving forward where things get reorganized and a different way of seeing the world comes online. That is, in a sense, the internal collective sense-making justification system that pilots and powers the new organizational structures that have emerged as well. And so this, I think, is really, really important as a transformational thesis, and it's core to the work that I am is doing, because it sheds a light on the integrative worldview as being a core aspect to understanding what's key to what's next. And so I think this is actually, really important for understanding, again, the work that I am is doing. It's also really important for what what lies behind the sociology of big pictures and what the community of people who ostensibly are operating with some version of that integrative worldview, the challenge that we face in trying to become ourselves coherent, network together, a kind of shared community that can actually do this kind of institution building and meet the challenge of this crisis by creating new kinds of systems. And so the need to cohere, even just amongst ourselves, seems to be a wonderful and urgent place to start before we can think about, kind of global systems change, this kind of thing. It's like we got to get our own house in order. So one of the things that I think was really important that you've been doing that really got kickstarted with this sociology of big pictures paper was to try to touch base with the different nodes of the network that are operating with some form of that integrative worldview and get a sense of the lay of the land, get a sense of what this, however we want to put various terms on it, the liminal web or the integrative movement, or, some of the meta-modern scene, the different folks who are working in this sort of headspace and worldview picture, what is that like, and how can we start to build a more synergistic network of folks in that community to actually start to realize some of these transformational needs. So can you speak to some of that? What was the genesis of that paper? What was kind of the thesis, and what was sort of the work that came out of it?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And you're absolutely right. All of this leads to worldview. You're right to notice that a new worldview is generated from each of these meta-crises in history. The worldview then acts as both sort of descriptive summary as well as generative mechanism to reproduce novel configurations economically from the point of view of politics, what technologies come online, the kind of philosophies that are generated to explore it and legitimate it. So what we are talking about really is worldview transformation. The integrative worldview is saying we're not going to throw out the past. We certainly wouldn't want to. What we want is a new container for holding the beauty of the traditional worldview, holding the beauty of the modern worldview, holding the beauty of the postmodern worldview, and finding new forms that allow for some of their partialities to dissipate, some of the demi-realities and ideologies that come along with them to be mitigated, and allow for a whole new set of things that are emancipatory, personally liberating, and basically heading towards eudaimonia in a broad arc kind of way, for humanity. And so that's really what it's all about. It's about bringing into being an integrative worldview that can compete, in a sense, for the back half of the 21st century. So that's the Institute's goal. I would argue that it's in some ways probably the goal of many of our friends and colleagues out across a lot of different institutions in the space. And so, from that standpoint, I think we all have a very, very deep and shared vision, more or less, about what we're attempting to do in the abstract. Our theory of change then is, if that's what we're attempting to do, is bring into being an integrative worldview. Question is, well, what does an integrative worldview need to become a thing? Well, it's ultimately going to have its own knowledge production processes. It's going to have a new knowledge economy that comes up alongside it, as Jürgen Wren would say, right? It's going to have as we said, new praxis. It's going to have new and modified value systems and normative containers where the people that interoperate with it understand each other and have values alignment in those ways. And so if we're headed to a place where it's this worldview is producing new things that can then reorganize, and help the world, then how do we do that? Well, we have to bring the people who are currently operating in it together. And that is easier said than done. My view in the white paper was that we need a set of integratively plural protocols that are very lightweight. Like they're lightweight commitments, they're minimally committed, as it were, sort of values containers that solve problems. These things have to solve problems. So if an institution in the space is like, well, how do I get more attention on what I'm doing? Then what we need a cooperation agreement to get everyone more attention. Each one has to solve a problem that together we can solve easier than what we can solve individually. And so ultimately, where we're headed, we think, is to build a network of network, basically a global action network, an integrative worldview association, which we've not said this publicly, but that is where we're headed, is to basically incubate an integrative worldview association, which is the sponsor and governance organization for a series of protocols which protocolize a set of common resource pools. And those common resource pools would be critical to the various pieces of this knowledge economy and its various sort of productions to support the institutional leaders that are already out in the world and probably already proto-integrative in a lot of ways to be supported to make the transformations within their own spheres and their own lives and what have you. So it's very much the theory of change is that we want to decentralize the effort, but to do so, we need to centralize some support protocols that a lot of institutions can tap into around the world in a new global action network.
Yeah, I think this is incredibly ambitious, and that's why I'm really excited by this. I think that we shouldn't shy away from that ambition. Personally, I think that the scale of the problems that we face collectively means we need to step up to the plate. And if we feel like some of these bigger picture understandings of the complexity of our situation actually provide some insight that can be of help to people, whether that's facing the meaning crisis or whether that's a shift in perspective that brings the ecological and environmental catastrophe into view for more people, et cetera, down the kind of meta-crisis line. If that's the case and we're serious about this, and I think we also need to get serious about getting organized as a community, as a movement, as a worldview, and trying to change the world. And so I see IAM as being at the forefront of that, and I think a lot of people are starting to really take notice of that. There's more people coming into this network. There's more people becoming aware of the work that we're doing. So I don't know if you want to speak at all to any of the sets of conversations or just the kinds of work that you've been doing to try to cohere this network. Maybe a little bit more about the Integrative Worldview Association or this notion of what some kind of collective organizational structure for the movement would look like. But I also wanted to talk about some of the other really important things that are going on within the research part of the Institute as well. But yeah, anything on any of that?
Well, I would tie a bit of those together in the sense that to to do the GAN, which will be, we're really just incubating, it will be emergent, and we will, we'll assemble it like we do anything, piece by piece, person by person, and allow it to grow from there in an emergent way. But I did indicate what the strategy is there, right? That there's a series of things that we have to do. We have to underlabor on behalf of the philosophy that undergirds the worldview. Like it can't just be a not thoughtful, not well researched, not well problematized thing. And so we have just assembled an academic journal to do that, which I'm sure you'll talk about here in a moment. It's very exciting. We're about to launch that publicly. In fact, by the time this goes live, people will probably have seen that launch. But really, that is it aims to be the home of integrative metatheory 2.0, this next generation of the metatheory and meta science that underlabors on behalf of the rise of this worldview and the knowledge economy. To get to a GAN before you did that is probably getting the order wrong, right? There's a way in which the order has to be right. We've got the Evolution of Philanthropy initiative underway, where we're beginning to engage with philanthropists in the conversation about what would an integrative philanthropy look like? What would philanthropy from this worldview look like? How do you think about that? How do you think about deep systems transformation? How do you think about the level of the real, to put it in Bhaskarian terms? What are the generative mechanisms that get your philanthropy out of creating as many problems as it's solving? That is what some of the things that integrative philanthropy should be able to do over the course of time. But you can see why, just doing philanthropy wouldn't be adequate. Just doing research wouldn't be adequate. Just doing any one of these things, tool building and AI development wouldn't be adequate. We actually need to do a lot of different things all at once. And from that development of the parts, a new holism emerges that can then start to invite others into a loose coalition, an umbrella that again hopefully solves problems for them
Mhm.
and gives them a place that they're excited to participate with. And I suppose to your concrete question, your direct question, I did a lot of phone calls and a lot of discussions with people after that white paper, and I think there's a broad diversity of folks in the liminal web that come from very different typological and almost like cosmic addresses in terms of, some orient spiritually, some orient more from the point of view of systems and political change, some orient more artistically and cultural change. And I think that's part of the problem, is that in a lot of ways, the liminal web, or a lot of this whole space, if you look at the topography of the space, it actually is a bit isomorphic to the problem of the meta-crisis writ large, meaning it is still in a postmodern fragmented topography. It doesn't have a set of structures that have emerged yet that help it to organize itself across boundaries and
Mm.
different kinds of vectors of perspective and vectors of history and vectors of sort of karmic and typological calling. So the very thing that is infecting the world system as a global steering problem is actually microcosmically represented inside of our community as well.
Mm.
That's why what we're attempting to do is build a microcosm that, if it can solve at that level, then as the coordination occurs within our own community, and I want to put a big asterisk on this in a second, within our own community, then it can start to help others and do that in a more decentralized way across a whole wide array of landscapes. The asterisk is this: our community is tiny, the liminal web is tiny, like, and the institutional maturity is very, very low. Like, we just don't have a lot of big institutions, and we don't have a lot of mature institutions. So we can't get it done from within this community anyway.
Mm.
Where do we find those institutions? Well, our thesis is that actually those institutions are already out there. Those leaders are already out there. It's what we call light teal, right? These are folks who already have a deep metasystematic or integrative apprehension cognitively and in the way they move through the world, but they don't know it. They don't know it because they've never been sort of had a mirror held up that says, this is who you are. And by the way, the reason you think the way you do and the reason you work the way you do is because you are inside of this thing called, an integrative mindset, or an integrative meaning structure, or an integrative worldview. Our belief is that that represents a radical transformational fulcrum, because we all know what it feels like when we were given kind of the landscape of some of our own proto apprehensions, and we're like, oh my God, look at this. Like, there's people that actually think this way, and I can learn so much, and there's a whole community, and there's values and practices, and it's amazing to come into the world when you're ready.
Mm.
I believe that there's actually 5, 10, 20, 50 million people actually out there now that are latent and don't know it. Those are the folks, ultimately, those are the folks that the GAN has to help to unleash on a radically decentralized basis with a new story of wholeness,
Mm.
a new story that is fundamentally a new spiritual story of wholeness for the 21st century. And that's why we're building a project called the New Story of Wholeness as a welcome mat for the worldview. But we're very explicit in that, say, we're competing for your attention with this worldview. We really want you to take it seriously. We see you. Here's the characteristics, the eight cosmic qualities of this worldview that stand differentially with the other ones. And so please take it seriously. You know, I'm sure when it's all said and done, it'll be like, oh, I failed in these ways, but we'll probably also learn a bunch, and maybe others will then pick it up and go, okay, yeah, but I'm going to do it this way and that way. That's
Mhm.
fine. That's exactly how it should work. We should build our ultimate success, all of us, on a whole wide degree of small failures amongst all of us. And the problem is, if we don't learn from each other on those failures, then there's no cultural capital accrual that's occurring inside of the knowledge economy. That's why the coordination is so important and having some containers
Yeah.
of accretion of knowledge. So
Yeah.
anyway, you put the quarter in, I went, but
No, it's great. It's great. And it also just speaks to the million things that are going on in the Institute and all the different projects. And some of them I want to hit on in a second. But yeah, just to kind of distill some of that, because you brought up so many points I just want to touch on that are really important. One is, I mean, kind of for me, bringing all that together seems like there's a serious maturational process underway in this movement that I think is super important in the sense that there does seem to be some real forward momentum and some deepening and some growth and nuance and depth and sophistication in the movement itself around the very frameworks it's using and the necessity, as you mentioned, for that work to be done before this can have a hope in some ways of scaling and reaching some of the institutional leaders and the context that it needs to reach. We've got to get our act together organizationally, but also conceptually, and basically stress test the worldview. If we're, I think we have a deep intuitive sense of, oh, wow, I found these ideas, these maps, these models, this big history, this, that, and they're life changing. You see the world in a different way, and so many things that had been disparate now find a wider container in a context that just it's a huge aha. And that's really important. And you already also gestured to a lot of that maybe some people have the pieces of that, but they haven't had necessarily someone kind of lay it out there for them to yet have that aha moment. And that's something that that's some work that needs to be done to try to help get these ideas out there. But in terms of moving that from some of the intuition and some of the, oh, okay, I fit here, and these ideas are what seem to make sense, and this theory seems to account for this. Uh, Moving from that to something really deep, empirically grounded, experimentally tested, validated, falsified, etc., is I think a really important move here. And there's multiple ways that this is playing out. In terms of the philosophy building, that's a part of this in terms of enhancing and improving and upgrading the meta-theoretical models that we're working with, dropping things that don't necessarily work, drawing from other insights from other models, and bringing a more kind of cohesive, comprehensive picture to this. That's a big kind of philosophical underlaboring that's underway and needs to happen. But also, in a sense, yeah, the empirical testing, the scrutinizing, the putting to the test some of the claims that are made in these big picture models and trying to figure out whether or not they stand up or not. And so there's a whole kind of empirical social scientific research component that's also a big part of this. And both of those things are core to the Institute and the work that we're doing. And I say we because this is now something that I'm deeply involved in, doing full time, coming on full time to the Institute as a director of research, and having this incredible container and resources to do this important kind of work has been so incredibly exciting and delightful for me, because I think that we need to improve the seriousness with which we present these ideas and these models to the world. If we're aiming at finding the leverage necessary in these contexts of institutional power, in academia, in Silicon Valley, wherever it is, again, I think that it's necessary that we seriously stress test these ideas and make this the most competitive worldview kind of on offer in the landscape of in the attention landscape that you talk about in your paper.
yeah, yeah.
There's so many ways in which people are finding pieces of this already in those institutional contexts, but missing key parts. I'm thinking of the accelerationists, who get the thermodynamic component, but then miss the entire wisdom and complexity stack thing, or people who see the value of transcendence and sort of moving to the next thing in certain transhumanist contexts, but obviously obviously totally misframe that to all sorts of disastrous outcomes. You can go down the list of a bunch of different ideologies that are currently not just on offer, but sort of the dominant ideologies in the leadership headspace, as it were, in people in Silicon Valley and in politics. And from where I sit, a lot of them are in many ways profoundly impoverished, but also in other ways so close but no cigar. It's like
Yeah.
it's right there. And so one of
Yeah.
the things that we need to do is present as robust a case as possible for this other wisdom grounded, complexity informed, big picture understanding of reality that can actually make these people look at that and say, "Oh my gosh, yes, that actually makes a lot more sense." And then to be able to work from that vantage at those levels of influence. And so that's just one component of it. But I just say all that because there's urgent need, I think, to get serious and more sophisticated with these models. And we need research and we need the philosophical underlaboring to do that. And that, I think, is happening kind of ground zero at the Institute of Applied Metatheory. So I wanted to say all that. But maybe you already hit on a couple of the other projects that are underway. You mentioned the new story of Wholeness. Maybe we'll just start there because there's multiple initiatives within that kind of research arm, think tank component of the Institute that I, again, think are just like really at the cutting edge and really at the sort of the forefront of like the urgent needs of the community specifically, but the world more broadly. You want to say a little bit about some of those other initiatives, including the new story of Wholeness?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Before I do, though, I just want to double click on what you just said and underscore how important it is. There's so many smart people in the world who have grabbed a part of the elephant and think they're holding the entire elephant when they're holding onto the trunk or they're holding onto the foot.
Mm,
And we know, of course, that we're holding the whole elephant, and we also still don't have the full picture. Like we
mhm,
get that. Like we get that. This is the knowledge tradition or the quest doesn't end, here. Uh, but we also know that we've accounted for the integrative worldview and the integrative meta theories have accounted for a lot, if not most, of what those other systems have, and the reverse is not true. So the true but partial nature of so many of these ideological views that are inside of our thought leadership today precludes them from being thought leaders. They're just not. They're just
mhm,
not. Not to serious integrative meta theorists. They're not thought leaders. They have a long way to catch up before they have a view that is broad enough to account for a lot of what we think reality is really up to. And the problem is that when you have a partial view of something and you have social power, by definition, you reproduce demi-realities. By
mhm,
definition, you reproduce ideological containers through your very action and blind spots that then generate these and reproduce the very things that you would say you don't want. So when Elon Musk says, I want to turn Grok loose to find like the meaning of everything, I keep thinking you're not going to get there that way. And actually, the integrative worldview gives you the closest answer to that question that you're going to get.
mhm,
And not because, some guys on a podcast said it. It's because there's been work going on for a century or more by thousands of geniuses to find a next level coherent picture of reality where now we can begin to see what's common across it and develop a truly a new story of wholeness. That's actually what Musk is looking for. He won't find it where he's looking for it. He needs an integrative worldview. So I just want to double down on that
mhm.
and really make the case that you guys, if anybody's listening, you're not going to get there without coming this way. And this is where the attentional competition comes in. I probably wouldn't have said that 10 years ago. I'd have been much more kind of I would have demurred and like, waffled around. And I'm just going to say it. That's a fact. That's a fact that the integrative worldview is where the world is coming. um, we can see it in the knowledge structures. We can see it in the ways that these things are fragmenting against each other and they can't get out of their own way. And what they're trying to find is a next level of integration of big pictures. So, what is the new story of wholeness? The new story of wholeness is, in a way, making that same case that there are these worldviews that operate today. And even though you may not know you have a worldview, you do have a worldview. You are largely at home in one of them, even though we all borrow from them, because we all run complex lives where we're getting composite influences from all of them. But you have a home in one of them. And these worldviews matter because it's it's kind of the holistic sense of how you make sense of your own life and how you kind of make decisions in that relative to your identity and the kind of work you want to do and what you count to be real and what you value and what your goals are. Like all of that is encompassed in a worldview. And here's where I turn the microphone the other way and I say, Brendan, you are doing some of the most important work through our worldview initiative to basically study and rationally underpin the notion of worldviews as hierarchically complexly emergent, and that there is this real thing in the form of an integrative worldview that's arising after the postmodern worldview, putting together a scientific instrument for that, putting together a new scientific instrument for that, because of what you just said. We need to ground it deep into science so that when someone comes into, let's say, the integrative worldview network, and we say there is this thing worldview, it's actually backed by the science. We can help them determine where their own worldview is and what the structure of that is. And if they are integrative, um, that's a credible claim. And so the worldview, we can get into some of the other initiatives. I'll come back to New Story in a moment, but let me just stop for a moment and invite you to say what the Worldview Studies initiative really is about, because this is a super
Yeah.
important one to the overall strategy for the whole movement.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so this is super exciting because I mean something like worldview, the term, I think we have an intuitive sense of it again, but so much about science is taking what we kind of think we know intuitively, but then shining a light on it, really being critical, reflective, and asking the questions to gain some yeah, rational clarity. So what is a worldview? If you actually were to try to either define it or think about its characteristics in like a reflective way, we should have an answer to that. If we're talking about worldviews all the time, but we're actually gesturing at some amorphous thing that maybe doesn't actually exist, or it's some kind of a folk idea that can't really be grounded in any way, then it's going to be very hard to do anything like social science around worldviews. So yeah, the Worldview Studies initiative that we've got in the Institute has multiple kind of prongs to it. But one of the first and most important is just getting theoretically clear about some of these key terms, right? What constitutes a worldview? What is a worldview? Why do we have them? How do they operate, et cetera? And so what I've been doing along with Nick Hedlund is really trying to parse that out, drawing on existing worldview studies literature, basically doing a sort of, you could say, a kind of meta review or a meta analysis of that literature, and trying to find a kind of meta theoretical framing for the concept of worldview that synthesizes the insights across these different works. And so this is a field that has been in some ways only scientifically engaged within the last, say, 30 or so years. Obviously, the term has a much longer history than that. So trying to do a little bit of conceptual archaeology on a term like worldview, recognizing the intellectual history of it, the kind of history of ideas, of where that idea comes from, how it emerges, how it changes over time, and then trying to employ the kind of existing scientific literature that's trying to take this idea very seriously as a particular construct to mean a particular thing, and ground it in a particular framework, largely evolutionary framework about what that is. Then we can have some clarity about a term like that, and then actually begin to study it, to measure it, right? And so worldview studies, scientific worldview studies, is an emerging kind of discipline that we're deeply engaged in, and trying to take seriously the proposition that we can actually, get a grip on what we mean by a thing like a worldview, and study them, measure them, and note their developments over time, which anyone, keen to evolutionary developmental notions of worldview would say, well, that would be sort of the gold standard, and the kind of holy grail that we'd be looking for. So we're doing what we can to sort of advance that study, and already have found some really, really important work to inform that, and we hope to produce a couple of papers around that. And then the other component of that is, as that work starts to kind of concretize and get clearer, we can actually then begin to operationalize the insights that come from that, and create certain instruments that can in a more fine-tuned way actually measure developmental aspects of worldviews, or do surveys surveys in which we can actually collect data and we can actually be able to get a read of the taxonomy of worldviews sort of deductively and empirically, rather than sort of working with, oh, we think we have an idea based on our models, and so we'll go out looking for that. Well, if you actually just ask thousands and thousands of people their values, their ideas of reality, what do they tell you, and then actually be able to build from the ground up an actual taxonomy of worldviews. So yeah, a lot of really exciting stuff coming out of that initiative, and again, just really important key theoretical underlaboring that needs to happen to move this ball forward. And the last thing I guess I'll say about that too is, some of the terminological confusion that's also easy to creep in that we'd want to clarify. What's a worldview versus a justification system or a paradigm or an ideology? These are all key kind of conceptual sociological terms, but trying to link them all up, see in a theoretical way and reflective way how they relate to each other, and just get some, conceptual clarity around this seems to be like, where you'd want to start before you could begin to do all the other sorts of things that you'd want to do with a construct like that. So the Institute sort of offering the container and the resources to really finally do that kind of thing, which is incredibly exciting.
Yeah. So thank you. It's great, a great summary, and it really does speak to why that's important work relative to the new story of wholeness. Because if we're going to come out and we're going to say there is this new story of wholeness and it's centered in this emerging worldview, we better have our facts straight and we better be able to back that up. Um, Now, what is that new story doing? It's acting first as a welcome mat for the integrative worldview, or sort of the integrative structure of development, more broadly. I mean, I've been doing this quite a long time now, it feels like. And I don't know, I know a lot of my friends and colleagues are like, yeah, we've never really had a place to send someone to tell them like what the hell we do.
Mm-hmm.
So at some level, we just need a welcome mat. Like, okay, what does the integrative like structure of mind stand for? It doesn't matter if you call it integral or meta-modern or unified or like, dialectically critical real. I mean, it's all coming from the same general structure of apprehensions that are meta-systematic or teal or integrative. Um, and there's a lot of those people out there. We really believe that. We actually know that from a lot of the science that's been done. We don't know how many, but we think there's a lot. And so, what does that stand for then? Welcome to the new story of wholeness. Like there's this thing going on. It's a worldview. And by the way, we believe that when you look across all of these big picture systems, reality suggests some features that are pretty cool. It suggests some features that we can actually look at and go, these are what we're calling cosmic qualities. Now, remember, this is meant to be accessible so that if you're first encountering this, like you can kind of get your hands around it. But like, hey, the universe evolves in layers. It complexifies. It's vertical. Like that's awesome. And it totally, I know, once for those of us who work with this, like it changes your view about things. It changes how you think about things. It changes if you think about yourself as vertical and this composite being with layers, because it allows you to associate with that composite self in a different way, in a more compassionate way, in a more nuanced way. It helps your relationships. It helps you think about, power and malformations of power and the ethical use of power. Reality is a process, right? It's processual. It becomes over time. It becomes, and that's amazing. It's relational. Reality is a relational field, and that's a primary thing. We're not just entities in this sort of cold, lonely universe interacting with other entities. We're always already an entity arising in relation to each other, rising in relation to everything around us. We're metastable fields of process. That's an extraordinary point of view. The universe is intelligent, that it's always learning. It's always learning. It's always learning, and we're a part of that. We're always learning. It's valuable, as you've written, and a lot of your work is around. I mean, it's fundamentally meaningful. It's fundamentally valuable. Judgment is not something we do after the fact as some sort of just human overlay or socially constructed overlay. Judgment and valuation is built into the very nature of the universe from the floorboards up. And that's an extraordinary thing. Being is intrinsically valuable. Perspectival, that perspectives matter, and there's a way in which there are different, fundamentally irreducible perspectives that arise in reality that we have to be able to honor and account for. Creative, the world creates new things and is diverse, and finally unified, that it all seems to be one. I mean, amongst the diversity, amongst the creativity, amongst all the other qualities, it also is one thing. It's one reality, and we're a part of that. We are a facet of the diamond, and we are that universe, and we are awakening. So we're becoming and learning and complexifying and relating and all this, but we're also awakening. That story of wholeness that we could only tell in its full sort of majestic grandeur right now in the 21st century after work of thousands of years and hundreds of years of science and all this other stuff is an extraordinary, extraordinary gift that
Mm.
we are all privileged to be a part of, because it's not just a gift of the mind, it's literally a gift of how we understand ourselves and who we are and how we move through our world and how important our lives are.
Wow. Yes. Amen. That was beautiful. And it's a wonderful summary. And I mean, for people also, watching or listening to this, this is the outline. This is the skeleton of something that is a project that is underway. This is coming into being. We're working on this, and this is something that the Institute hopes to put out into the world as an interactive kind of digital experience, and to begin to kind of from the ground up reconceptualize, reimagine, literally reimagine, reimage, revisualize some of the core concepts of this integrative worldview in a new way, in a new kind of aesthetic, and a new rendering that I think will be just a really impressive product on its own terms, but also, as you say, is trying to serve the function of where do you send someone when you're like, wait, what are you talking about? What integrative what, or unified theories of what?
What the hell do you do?
What are you talking about? If you could just be, oh, well, okay, here you go. And then you kind of, send them a link, and then have a very accessible, but also very thorough kind of exposition of what that really means. That doesn't exist yet. And I think it seems, as I think was the motivating impulse for this, that seems necessary to have some version of that out there on offer if we're going to, be able to do some of these network organizational kind of self-consciously, cohering moves as a community. So that is a really exciting project. There's a number of other projects. We'll have to do another conversation and get into some of the
Yeah,
specifics of
yeah.
the other ones. But
Cultural
yeah.
complexity index, where we're trying to kind of re-architect the world's knowledge canon through the overall models of hierarchical complexity to see what those indicate and whether that holds up. Vindication of the developmental models and looking at, are those developmental models in the psychological and constructive developmental fields and some of the claims that we've been making, are those holding up based on the best science that we've got? Let's see, the faith development pathways. So this is trying to develop a protocol for the developmental pathway of ultimate concern coming out of Fowler's work and the stages of faith. So again, you can kind of see, if you're starting to get the whole picture, you can see how it's fractal. Like everything we're doing is trying to create the pieces that can generate different efforts across this. Now, one of the things I want everybody to hear really carefully and clearly is the goal here is not for the Institute to become some hegemonic, like we're doing everything for everybody. It's actually not at all. What we're trying to do is seed each of these projects. Each one, and I'm very clear about this with everybody I talk to, everyone can become its own institution. Everyone can become its own network. We could have a network of integrative philanthropists that's operating with its own institutional infrastructure, what have you. We have a whole network of faith development, developmental faith pathways, and an institute of faith development at the core of it, so on and so forth. It's seeding the institutional infrastructure that hopefully over the course of the next 5 or 10 years can become its own really robust network of networks of networks
Yeah.
of all of these different things, but are doing things from an integrative faith, integrative philanthropy, integrative research and knowledge, so on and so forth, transformative education, vertical leadership development. This all has to be done.
Yeah.
This all has to be done. And in my white paper, I call for us getting to, I think, $50 to $100 million of of funding for these projects in the next 5 or 6 years with a attentional reach of like, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 million people, I think, or maybe 50 million people. The numbers aren't as important as just like the orders of magnitude. And that's really what we're attempting to do. So we have been bumping up our funding at an order of magnitude a year at the Institute. And we're very, very fortunate to have done that. About to announce a worldview fund, an integrative worldview fund, which I don't want to get off track, but we can. Anyway, it's the point is bringing up sort of seeding an ecosystem
Yeah.
towards as we head towards this global action network.
Yeah, and that's actually a great tee up for the last thing I want to get into here, which is, I guess I'll say it this way. I mean, so as you say, this is about institutional seeding. It's not. IAM is not about having the ring to rule them all. It's about letting a thousand flowers bloom, but being able to help with the institutional kind of incubation part for this level of integrative systems building that needs to happen. To bring back what we were talking about earlier, yeah, when you see these meta-crisis phase transitions happening in culture, and you see the emergence of a new worldview structure, you see the emergence of new institutional systems that are the supports and the containers for that system and the reproductive mechanisms for that at a kind of collective level. In kind of the integral thing, that's that lower right kind of component that's so necessary for that to happen. Now, if you go back to like the 18th century, after the Enlightenment and the kind of early dawn of the kind of real modern scientific enterprise, you see something like the birth of the Royal Academy, right, in Britain, and that became a core, a hub, a crucial kind of lower right systems container for this emerging worldview that was rational and critical and engaged the scientific method, et cetera, and was the mechanism by means of which ideas and insights and findings from that could spread and grow and all of that. And in some ways, we recognize the need for something like that as well at the integrative worldview. If we're going to be advancing knowledge in this field, if we're going to be having a kind of intellectual scholarly container that can help advance a lot of the work that needs to be done, ideally we could do that from a kind of coherent space together and get some momentum and synergy in building something like that. And so that is kind of how I want to introduce or announce, the journal effort that is going on. And again, by this point, will have been publicly announced. And the journal called Integration, the Journal of Big Picture Theory and Practice, is what the Institute, as sort of the founding society, is cohering as that container for some of the exciting work that's being done. So say a little bit about this really, really exciting and really, really crucial and important project.
Yeah, I thank you. I very, very excited about this. If I could you mind if I share my screen just to
Sure.
show? It's something that I believe I don't know if I showed this in the white paper or not. So this is just a view that I think gets at the some of the overall kind of meta theory of the arc of a new worldview coming into being, and why this gets to the journal specifically at the end here. But ultimately, we end up with a cognitive surplus here. But starting on the left side here, we're in this current situation where the pain of reorganizing the world system is bigger than the pain of not solving it. So at this point, that pain wins. And when you end up in a civilizational steering crisis, it tends to be multifaceted. Certainly in our meta crisis, with a globalized 21st century system, it absolutely is. It's ecological, it's sense making, it's meaning, psychological, it's techno-economic, and it's governance. So the pain of not solving it's going to grow. And as we're seeing that, it's going to grow because these contradictions inside of the existing worldviews that are generating are not going to get solved from those worldviews. So the pain of not solving it is going to continue to grow. At some point, the pain of not solving will outstrip the pain of reorganizing. And when that happens, all of those worldview limitations that are currently generated inside of the current system will be overcome by the new philosophy that's emerging to make the old system and the old worldviews tractable, to make this problem, this civilizational steering crisis, tractable. Habermas gets into this. Um, as that new philosophy comes online and supersedes prior philosophies, with a new worldview, it starts to generate a cognitive surplus. And you can think of a cognitive surplus as that set of ideas, that set of knowledges, that set of social practices and other things that allow for this old set of structures to now become tractable, meaning we can now approach it, we can understand it, we can actually get our hands around it, we can begin to think about solutions that have a chance of working, whereas prior we did not. And what happens is that cognitive surplus grows and eventually it overcomes your steering crises. And as it does, a new civilizational operating system comes into being. You have new sense making, you have new identities, you have new stories you're telling, you have new structures and new institutions. In our case, I don't think, as we said, the integrative, what is it integrating? All the prior. It's not getting rid of the prior. But when something new comes online, it helps to reconfigure what came prior. So you don't not have a traditional worldview. It just slightly reconfigures some of what the traditional worldview might do, et cetera. So this is where does that cognitive surplus arise? It arises in a community, a knowledge economy community that is building cultural capital and tightly interlinked scholars and scholar practitioners who are who are who are very much intentionally going after building that set of structures of knowledge. And you mentioned the Royal Society as a good example, and we can look back, we can look back at other times where that was the case as well. So integration is meant as a hub and a vehicle and a transmission mechanism for the community of scholarship that can arise around this integrative meta theory 2.0 sort of philosophy building.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's again, I think a kind of crucial piece of the puzzle here. That was a beautiful presentation of the dynamics there. That's so important. And it's also it's in itself a version of what we were talking about earlier. In some ways, not just say the liminal web, but the group of scholars engaged in a set of inquiries is also isomorphic to the fragmentation of the crisis that we're looking at. So
Yes.
trying to bring those
Yes.
scholars together, is kind of the key here. So who are the other
That's right.
communities of folks, the Evo Devo community and the work that they're doing, and other, evolutionary biology or universal Darwinist theories, or predictive processing and cognitive science, or these different fields that are getting at these big approaches, these big theories. Where can they come together and mutually inform one another? Where can folks interested in broad levels of scale and scope of inquiry come together to compare their models? And so trying to have a space in which that is the intentional concern is really paramount. And so more than ever, probably the silification of knowledge in the academy is a problem. And people trying to be expert generalists, and not just those, but people who are experts in their field whose work would benefit from a more general framing, or whose work could be put to service when brought into a broader conversation with other related kinds of ideas. This is work that obviously many folks have recognized needs to happen. There are different versions of this that have been attempted, but some kind of form of attempts of consilience, or the bringing together of knowledge across the different disciplines, is a big focus of this. And then people who, again, are kind of aware of the broader meta framing that could try to hold the knowledge that is generated from the different disciplines. How do we, again, use those as units of analysis to be able to compare and contrast and do the theory building, the meta theory building, the philosophy building that's needed for this? So that, I think, is very much kind of the goal for integration, the journal, and what we're trying to offer here. And I'm really excited by already the momentum of this project and the people who've already signed on to be on the ed board, to be reviewers. It's a really impressive masthead. It's a really impressive group of folks, and it's also still growing, and still will continue to evolve and improve. And so it's I'm really looking forward to it. I guess might as well announce too, there's a call for papers, people who now have a sense of what this journal is, what we're trying to do, the kinds of work that we'd like to publish. Obviously, check out the website and get a sense of the submission guidelines and all of that, and the kinds of topics. But the call for papers is there, and I'm really excited to see what winds up emerging for our first issue and the kind of next step for this movement of ideas in 2026. I'm really feeling, and hopefully watchers, listeners are getting a sense of the momentum that I think is really going on here for all of this, and that just excites me so much. Anything else you'd like to throw into the mix here around the institute, the projects, the movement? Yeah.
I think it's important that everybody hear the amount of agency that exists inside of the subtext of the conversation, that they
Mm,
have infinite agency here. They really, really do. And we all do. And that is a profound source of hope. It's a profound source of meaning. And all you have to do is take it seriously. All you have to do is take yourself seriously. All you have to do is tune in to what's happening, tune in to some of the bigger picture currents, and what they're telling us about reality to know that like we're in really good shape. It's a dark time, but it's a time that's absolutely necessary to set the conditions for what is trying to emerge. It always has been the case. That's your job, and that's our job, and that's all of our jobs, and that's exciting. It's daunting. I mean, like we all have our moments, but it's also really cool. Like, there's no lack of meaning inside of the world today. And there's a whole group of people that you can join to do it. And we need people. So, we need storytellers. We're not very good at storytelling. You can hear the way I talk. I'm very systems oriented, talk about philosophy, dead scholars. Like we need better storytellers. We need people who can do concept art, right? If you're a conceptual artist, contact us. We need people who can translate ideas in complex ideas into awesome two-dimensional and screen-oriented storytelling devices. Um, we need this is funny because I didn't think I'd ever say this again after teaching in MBA school or teaching in business schools, but or guest lecturing, and I'm like, we need MBAs. Like MBAs have a valuable role to play of like, okay, I take this thing and now I got to go build an organization and go run it as a business and all this other stuff. Like that's a thing that we need. Um, we need people who can help with events and putting on events. We've got an academic conference we have to design and deliver. We've got symposia. We need community builders. These are all out here. Like I'm sure I just touched a lot of the people that are listening. We need all of those folks to help. And so there's a role for everybody. And yeah, there's a lot to do.
yeah, well said. And I guess just to wrap that up, I think that's actually a wonderful way of bringing it all back to the name, the Institute of Applied Metatheory. I think this is the application part. It's not, I think maybe, I don't know, some decades ago, right? There was a lot of hope and aspiration. Hey, Age of Aquarius, evolving consciousness, it's going to change the world, right? Sure, but we need to get our hands dirty. We got to do stuff. We gotta make things. We have to build systems. We have to get involved. And so, having an institute, an organization like this, in which we're taking that consciousness, but we're applying it to these big problems with big pictures. That's sort of the name of the game. And yeah, I think that was a lovely call to action for anyone out in the audience who has those skills and many others to please get involved with this. This is just the beginning. So. Gosh, Rob Smith, amazing. Thank you so much, my friend. This was a great conversation. I look forward
Thank you
to
for having me.
having some more in the future. But yeah, until then, Godspeed.
Awesome. Thank you.